on the roof deck. So our program today is sponsored and enabled by our partners, mainly the Ateneo Art Gallery, the Museum Foundation of the Philippines, and Tezos. Today, we have a talk on collecting photography, and the resource person is Paul Martineau, who is the curator of the photography department of the Getty Museum. He will have a presentation, after which he will be in conversation with Neil Oshima, one of our well-known photographers in the country. And I will now introduce Neil, and Neil, in turn, will introduce Paul. So, good morning, everyone. Neil Oshima is an award-winning commercial, editorial, and fine art photographer based in Manila, Philippines. He graduated with a Bachelor of Science in Archaeology from the University of Hawaii and a Master of Fine Arts in Photography from the San Francisco State University. Oshima co-founded the Shadow Visual Design Group, which serviced advertising and design requirements of major retail groups in the Philippines in the 1980s, after which he pursued a career as an independent fashion and advertising photographer. Over the years, he has had several successful assignments and exhibitions, both locally and internationally. His works experiment with calotypes, cyanotypes, and other photographic processes. You can see actually some of his work with platinum prints, a very difficult process. It's on the 7th floor of the art fair this time. He uses the medium of photography as a data gathering tool to examine culture and capture various facets of society. Last year, for Art Fair Philippines 2022, where we had a hybrid presentation in the Ayala Triangle Gardens, Oshima, together with Michael Salientes, Mark Nicdao, and Gio Panlillo, curated an exhibition for Art Fair Philippines photo section titled Tattoos, Ternos, and Couture, a celebration of Philippine fashion photography, which aimed to celebrate and acknowledge the country's long and insightful history of fashion photography. Before I pass you on to Neil, I'd like to say that he has been one of the moving forces in establishing the photography section in the art fair, which we're fortunate to still see continuing today. So from the time we started 4 or 5 years ago, Neil has been there supporting us. And for that, we're very grateful. So may I present Mr. Neil Oshima.
Also, I should thank the Art Fair for promoting photography in this country, art photography. I think it's been a big boon, the medium. It's a tremendous pleasure and a real honor for me to introduce Paul Martineau, our speaker today. I've spent 50 years in photography.
Recording stopped.
I've spent 50 years in photography in the pursuit of the photograph as art. When I was a student, I sincerely believed that after Marcel Duchamp's large glass and Ad Reinhardt's black canvases, painting as an art form was dead, and that photography would take its place. Well, I noticed that painting is still around, and I still believe that the photographic medium is centrally important.
Recording in progress.
Yes, centrally important in telling us who we are, what we've experienced, and what we will become as beings on this planet. Since I met Mr. Martineau last year, and having had numerous discussions with him about photography since then, I am struck by the tremendous passion, encyclopedic knowledge, and acute sensitivity he brings to the medium. I can honestly say that my interest in photography as an art form has been profoundly rekindled by our discussions, and I realized it was important to ask him to speak here at Art Fair Philippines. Paul has been the, sorry. Paul has been the curator of photographs at the Getty Museum for around 20 years and has produced many amazing exhibitions and books. The Getty's is the world's largest collection of art photographs, and as I understand it, it is the one area in which the Getty actively collects work from contemporary artists. And not insignificantly, the Getty has the largest endowment of any cultural institution in the world. But I should let Paul tell you about this. Please welcome Paul Martineau.
Thank you very much for that generous introduction, Neil. I'm coming at you from my home in Los Angeles. I'm very sorry I can't be there with you. The fair looks incredible. And what I thought we would do is I could tell you a little bit about the J. Paul Getty collection of photographs, and then afterward, Neil and I can have a little discussion about collecting. I'm going to share my screen. Okay. And this is where I work. It's a very beautiful place. The Department of Photographs at the J. Paul Getty Museum was founded in 1984 with the acquisition of several major American and European collections. Today, it is one of the finest collections of photographs in the world, with more than 50,000 individual prints, 1,500 daguerreotypes and other cased objects, 30,000 stereographs and carte de visite, and approximately 475 albums containing almost 40,000 mounted prints. The museum holds some of the earliest experiments in the history of photography, including rare examples by William Henry Fox Talbot, Hippolyte Bayard, and Joseph Philibert Giraud de Prangy. In fact, this particular daguerreotype of the Parthenon is the first extant picture of the Parthenon that we have today. The collection has an important holding of photographs created by British, French, and American photographers from the 1850s to 1860s. Prints by Gustave Le Gray, Nadar, Francis Frith, Julia Margaret Cameron, and Carlton Watkins demonstrate the growing visual sophistication and artistry during photography's so-called golden age. Photographs by 20th century masters such as Alfred Stieglitz, Eugene Atget, Man Ray, Edward Weston, August Sander, Dorothea Lange, and Walker Evans are all held in depth, making the study of their entire careers possible. The creative and the documentary fundamental impulses that run through the history of the medium are both well represented. The second half of the 20th century is covered by photographers such as Irving Penn, Bill Brandt, Diane Arbus, William Eggleston, Lucas Samaras, and Robert Mapplethorpe. I think we'll just go back to the Lucas Samaras because it's so incredible. It's a Polaroid, and what Lucas has done is he's taking a picture of himself, and while the Polaroid is developing, he's using something to scumble the surface of the Polaroid as it's developing, interfering with its development so that only his hand is clear. The department has a small but growing holding of contemporary photographs. These are gathered internationally with significant recent additions from Brazil, Germany, China, and South Africa. And I think I'm going to jot back to the Vic Munitz, which is a picture of junk. Munitz had this idea that he would help clean the streets of Brazil by having children and teenagers grab all sorts of garbage from the streets and bring them to this large warehouse where he directed them by means of a large ladder to place these objects in a fashion so that when you took the picture, it would look like a painting by Goya. The most important thing that a curator at the Getty Museum does is to care for the collection. And caring for such a large collection requires us to employ a staff of 12 people, including 7 curators, 2 research assistants, and 2 full-time and 1 half-time support positions. We're very fortunate to be located adjacent to our main storage vault and to the conservation lab. Before photographs are exhibited or go out on loan, a curator and conservator get together and examine the objects to determine if any treatments are needed. The second most important task are acquisitions. The department continues to collect, always with the twin goals of complementing the existing collection and filling gaps. We do this by purchase, approximately 100 to 200 pictures a year, and by gifts, approximately 300 to 600 pictures come in by gift. Exhibitions are a very important part of our program because they allow us to share what we have with the public. And we typically have 9 exhibitions per year. We prefer to divide the exhibitions up into 2 monographic shows and 1 collection survey. Here is an example of a show that I did several years ago called Paul Outerbridge Command Performance. We're also involved in publications as another way to reach out to people that can't be in Los Angeles. And we have a very active program. Since 1986, we've been responsible for at least 90 new titles. And then we have our loan program. In addition to our exhibitions, dozens of our photographs are requested by museums throughout the world for inclusion in their temporary exhibitions. This image nicely illustrates our packing preferences. Photographs are placed face up, wrapped in glassine, placed in a double crate with a seal around the edges to provide a microclimate inside. The stamp on the front indicates the lumber has been treated to obviate pest concerns for international shipment. And then finally, we have the study room, which is located in the Department of Photographs. The photographs not on display in the galleries are available for viewing in the photograph study room, which is open by appointment to researchers, students, and other members of the interested public. We normally have about 35 classes per year that we teach in the study room, where we explain the history of photography to college students, mostly in photography fine art classes or history of photography classes. And then I put together a little example of one of the books that projects that I did. This one's on still life, and we did a small book with about 80 images. The idea was that we would only use pictures that were in the collection. So I searched the collection looking for still life photographs. The collection is organized by maker, and it isn't tagged by genre. So I had to physically look through the collection to find the pictures. I stopped looking when I got to about 600 pictures because I only needed 80. And then came the work of editing them down into a show, well, into the book, which would have 80 plates, and into a show, which would have about 25 pictures. and that's a view of the galleries. But what I found is that we didn't have very many contemporary still lifes, so I had to go out and search for contemporary works and buy a few and bring them back to the Getty for this exhibition. But I'll show you some of the highlights. This is a still life of plaster casts by Baron Seguier, who was one of the founders of the medium of photography, along with Daguerre, who was probably in the room when this picture was made. Daguerreotypes are created on copper sheets with a highly polished silver surface that's been coated with iodine. And after the exposure is made, the whole thing is fumed over mercury vapors, and the latent image comes out, and it is a unique object. The only way to copy one is to take another picture of one. This is a still life by Louis Remy Robert, and he was the head of the painting workshop at the Sèvres Royal Porcelain Manufactory, and he became interested in photography. He was one of the first French photographers to use the paper negative and positive process over the daguerreotype, which allowed photographers to get a much softer image. And it also allowed for reproducibility. You could use a paper negative to make 25 to 50 prints, something that the daguerreotype could not do. And here we have a variety of highly decorated vessels that are surrounded by the sensuous curves of the statuette of the female bather. The number of still lifes of exceptional quality declined during the 1870s and 1880s, and the shift away from still life as a subject was not only a result of changing tastes, but also the invention of the dry plate negative, which made traveling with a camera less cumbersome. This fine platinum print of white lilies, flowers traditionally associated with the Immaculate Conception, is an exception. Collier included the dying blooms at the base of the stalk to remind the viewer of the fleeting nature of beauty. During the first decade of the 20th century, photographers such as Baron de Meyer helped to advance the idea that photography should emulate other forms of art. Here, de Meyer photographed several glass objects through a scrim. The thin woven fabric softened the backlit objects, replicating the subtle tonal effects prized in etchings by artists from Rembrandt to Whistler. Still life served as a vital experimental form during the birth of photographic modernism. Paul Strand experimented with commonplace objects in an attempt to discover the nature of photographic abstraction. This photograph of a bottle in a sink holds dynamic dimensional tension between its neck and its surroundings. It's beautiful, isn't it? In the mid-1930s, Paul Outerbridge mastered the Carbro printing process and developed a successful career as a commercial color photographer. He believed that the difference between a good and a mediocre still life photograph was the quality of the artist's imagination and his reactions to the objects at hand. Outerbridge designed and constructed this scene in a studio before photographing it. And the view out the window was a photograph that he just placed in the hole made by this wooden surround. In this photograph, a severed head, 3 sunken eyes, and eviscerated organs glisten on a whiteboard. Evoking biblical imagery, medieval grotesques, and heraldic emblems, Summers' composition calls on the viewer to consider the endless cycle of birth and death and the cruel reality of the food chain. I had the pleasure of meeting some of the people who worked in Frederick Summers' studio, assisting him during his later years. And they told me on a good day, he made 10 prints, and he destroyed 9, kept 1. And so whenever you see a Frederick Sommer print, it's just absolutely gorgeous. First known for his poetic views of Prague, Sudik created a series of studio still lifes that brought him even greater acclaim. Here, the artist's window frames an arrangement of objects that include a water glass with 3 roses, a cowrie shell, and a stack of books. The condensate streaked window emits a somber light, provides a glimpse of the trees in the garden, and indicates a change of season. Joanne Callis began making still lifes using black and white materials and later shifted to the glossy, vibrantly colored Cibachrome process. This photograph of a pine nestled in pink satin is part of a series called Forbidden Pleasures, which explores the artist's notion of the seductive power of rich desserts and the guilt often associated with eating them. And now we finally arrive at the picture that I added to the collection specifically for the show. And it is Ori Gersh's Blow Up, Untitled number 15. It's a diptych. And what Gersh does is he creates still lifes that are based off of 16th and 17th century still life paintings that he finds in museums in the Netherlands. And then he freezes them using liquid nitrogen, and then he explodes them and captures each bit of the explosion through a set of cameras that are set up to document the whole thing, and synchronized digital cameras. And rather than just turning into a puff of dust, because the blossoms are frozen, they shatter and they scatter. And this is what you get. Gersh grew up in Israel, so he was used to explosions, unfortunately, during his childhood. And he brings that into this picture, which is really all about the tensions of opposites. The tension of something moving that's actually called a still life, which is supposed to be motionless. Also, the tension between art and science, and creation and destruction, and even painting and photography. So this is the kind of thing that really turns me on. I will stop sharing. And come back for any questions.
Paul, can I ask a question? Paul, how did you become a curator of
Oh,
photography?
and I think,
Did you guess?
yeah, good.
How did you become?
Now I can hear you.
How does one become a curator of photography? What is the education and career path for such a position? And how would you advise a young person interested in doing this kind of work?
Well, I wasn't sure what I wanted to do when I went to college. I thought maybe I would be in international relations and diplomacy. And I took one political science course and I hated it. So I switched to history, which I did well in high school. And I took an art history course. And once I did that, I was hooked. And I switched my major to art. I went to UMass Boston. And at UMass Boston, they have an art major where you can focus on either studio art or history of art. So I focused on history of art, but I was required to take 3 studio courses. And so I took drawing, printmaking, and photography. And those classes were not easy. They were very challenging and really ideal for me because it made me understand the creative process and made me have a much deeper empathy for artists and what they go through. After that, I worked for 2 years at the Museum of Fine Arts in Boston in the research library. And it was when I was there that I decided I would go on and get a master's degree in art history. So I went to Williams College. After Williams College, I I went to Paris and I did an internship in Paris for a few months, and then I came to this job at the Getty. So it requires quite a bit of education, and also it requires somebody that doesn't give up, that keeps on looking to learn. That's one of the fascinating things about my job is I'm continually learning new things every day.
Why photography?
I love the fact that I loved works on paper, firstly, because of the intimacy. But I also saw that photography was where it was at, that photography is really growing and was extremely interesting. And some of the other mediums seem to be kind of in a downward progression, whereas photography was in an upward progression. I thought there would be more opportunities for me. And actually, in the beginning, I studied prints, drawings, and photographs because sometimes photography departments and museums are embedded with the other works on paper.
Works on paper.
So I also knew something about printmaking academically.
And why is the Getty concentrating on photography so much as the medium of collection?
It was the same type of thing, the same type of epiphany that I had, that when the Getty trustees got hold of Mr. Getty's money, which in 1976 it was 700 million, and in 1984, when all the lawsuits were over, it had grown to 2.5 billion. They realized they had so much money that they had to come up with more than one way to spend it. So rather than just going with Mr. Getty's collecting areas, they decided to add photography to the group of collections. And they invested $25 million in 1984, which was a lot of money in 1984. And they bought several collections. The two most prominent were those of Arnold Crane, which was about 3,500 pictures. And Crane was in New York. He was a banker, but he was also a friend of Man Ray's and a photographer himself. And then the other big collection that we bought was Samuel Wagstaff's. He was the partner of Robert Mapplethorpe. And for $5 million, we got over 26,000 objects. So instantly, in 1984, we had a major collection. And we've been purchasing pictures ever since. We like to think of ourselves as, at least in the early days, as collecting collectors, that we would buy whole collections. But we don't do that as often now. But we do try to do it in groups rather than just ones and twos.
Well, when I saw your book on fashion photography, Icons of Style, I was amazed at the number of great photos I had never seen by artists whose work I thought I knew so well. I felt that joy of I felt that joy of discovery as well as the excitement you must have felt juxtaposing images and creating new dialogues between two different artists. Would you care to elaborate on the experience of curating exhibits and authoring books, and just how much creativity can you bring to that sort of endeavor?
It's really wonderful because you really can put your creative stamp on your projects. First of all, I don't do any projects that I don't want to do. Because the projects take around 4 years on average, if they have a book, you really want to like your topic. You don't want to be stuck working on something for 4 or 5 years that you're not interested in. So I'm very fortunate in that I've worked on a lot of great projects that I decided that I wanted to work on. Um, and there's always a little bit of room for kind of putting your own stamp on things. Like when I showed the picture of the chicken in parts,
Fred
I
Sommers.
mentioned that, yes, the Frederick Sommer. I mentioned that it was, you know, a reminder of the cruelty of the food chain. And, you know, as a vegetarian, that was my opportunity to kind of, you know, remind meat eaters that it, it, it isn't as always clean as we like to think. So, you know, you can get it in there, your own personality.
In the icons of style, are all those images in the Getty collection, like the ones on?
No,
No, like
no. I would say about 50% are, and then I borrowed from maybe 40 different lenders
so like
to complete.
the Guy Bourdin images. I'd never seen them before, and I was a great fan of his work. How'd you
Oh
get
yes,
those?
those pictures were ones that we purchased. Um, that I saw that there was an opportunity to buy things from the estate that were very early Guy Bourdin pictures that I'd never seen before. And so I thought, well, this is a major artist. This is an opportunity. We're going to go in and make some purchases. So we bought all those black and white
So those were
pictures.
before he started doing a lot of the fashion work.
He was doing some of the fashion work, but he wasn't doing it in color quite yet.
I see. Yeah, I heard that he left barrels of Kodachromes and Ektachrome slides when he died. He refused to let them be published outside of the
Right.
fashion magazines.
Yes. He was very talented.
Yeah.
And it really brings you back to this kind of late 70s.
Yeah. Um,
There are certain pictures that really remind you of a particular era, and his do that for me.
yeah. There must be questions. People.
Hello, Paul. My name is Stephanie.
Hello.
Hi. In what direction are you moving with collecting? And what are? Okay, let's start with that.
Well, we are looking to really readjust the collection so it's more diverse. As I mentioned, we started collecting globally contemporary art, and we want to add more women, more people of color, and more LGBTQ folks to the collection as makers. So that's what we've really been concentrating on in the past few years.
I heard you've been to the Philippines.
I love the Philippines, and I definitely want to have Filipino photography be part of our collection.
Thank you.
Hello, Paul. I'm
Hello.
LK. Hello, I'm LK. I'm studying MA Art Studies in University of the Philippines, Diliman. And I have kind of a loaded question as a researcher from the global south. As one of the largest or one of the most known photography institutions, aside from acquiring photographs, can you share with us Getty's efforts or initiatives to disrupt or challenge the dominant Western narrative common in telling the history of art or photography or history in general?
Well, what I just said, the fact that we're trying to collect more women and people of color and LGBTQ folks, they're all people that have been excluded from the museum at different times. And that's something we want to correct. And so we do that in terms of our exhibitions, our books, our online presence, and also what we show students in our study room. So it's been a major a major amount of effort on our part, where we spent maybe 4 or 5 years adding to the collection, really trying to reshape it and make it more equitable.
Well, maybe a last question is, with the extreme proliferation of images from surveillance cameras and mobile phones, the internet, etc., what do you think is the future of art photography? Is it soon to be as dead as painting?
I don't think it's going to be dead, but it is changing. And I don't really have as much interest in images that aren't objects. I love the objecthood of photography. I want to hold it in my hands. I want to look at it closely. And I'm not interested in acquiring a file or a digital file or an NFT because I don't know how to print it. And I don't know if the technology that the artist chose to have it printed will exist when we want to print it. And no one can make those decisions except for the artist. How big it should be, what medium it should be, what kind of tones it should be. Only the artist can decide that. And so I think it's really something that I'm not very interested in.
Here's okay. Hi, Paul. I'm Boots Herrera, the director of Ateneo Art Gallery. Lisa actually shared with me earlier that when you loan out your photographs to museums for special exhibitions, you don't use exhibition prints. Can you explain this decision or policy, or do you? What's your policy regarding? Yes,
We
sorry.
prefer to purchase and own vintage prints. And by vintage prints, I mean a print that was made within 5 years of the negative, if at all possible. There are some areas in photography where it's very difficult to do, like fashion photography. Because there wasn't a market for fashion photography in the 50s and 60s, let's say, it was only in the 1980s when a market started to be viable that photographers like Avedon and Irving Penn started to go back to their earlier work and make new prints. So we try to send what we would want to put on the wall, and that is a vintage print rather than an exhibition print.
Thank you very much.
Paul, it's Stephanie
Yes.
again.
Hi.
What advice would you give to beginners of collecting photography?
Oh, I think you have to really educate yourself, and you do that by reading books and about photography, and also going to museums and not only seeing their photographic exhibitions, but also asked to see their holdings. As I mentioned, we have a study room, and researchers and other interested people can come, make an appointment, and they can ask to see a box of pictures by Alfred Stieglitz, and we'll bring out a box and let them look through it. Of course, we insist that they observe our handling rules, but we like to be able to share the works with them. You know, these very valuable works on the table without glass, so people can really appreciate the beauty of the surface quality of these prints. It's sometimes I get sad when I see somebody in my exhibitions with a camcorder and they're recording all the pictures, and it's like, you're here in front of the real artwork. Let's have a real experience with the artwork and not have it be mediated through technology. you can do that anytime, but you can't have the real experience in front of the artwork all the time. So when you have that opportunity, I think people should take it.
Thank you.
Hello, Paul. My name is Angela Silva, and I'm an artist. I work with photographs. The Getty is an institution, a fine institution with a large acquisition budget. Does the Getty have
Yes.
a program for supporting and educating the practice of photography, especially in countries and cultures that might not have such funding? And we are a smaller market.
Yes, yes. We have a program for conservators to train conservators around the world for preserving their own cultural heritage, but we don't have a training program for artists per se. But I'd like to think that the areas that we move into will help change in a positive way how people in those countries think about their own artists and cultural heritage. For instance, if we buy a lot of materials in China, let's say, or Japan, or in the Philippines, then some of the institutions that are in those countries will start to say, well, the United States values, the people there value this artwork. So perhaps we should value it more than we have in the past. So I like to think that when we reach out to these different areas around the globe, that we're helping them indirectly.
Well, I think that's great, Paul. Thanks.
That's
Thanks
it.
Any other questions? No?
I love answering your questions.
More questions? Oh yeah, what do you think about editioning prints? Does that stimulate collection, or do you think that prints should be open edition?
It can be, there are some collectors that like to know which number they have, and they like to know that there's a limit on the number of prints that are going to be made. I think that if you go that way, you should really keep it tight. People want to have a certain exclusivity to their work. So when they arrive at the point where they can do it, they might have 3 prints, 5 prints, 10 prints, and just have the prices be high and not make any more. The worst thing I think you can do is have additions to 500 or 100, because then it doesn't seem like there's any limit. I mean, that the limit is so great that it doesn't matter. There's no exclusivity to the amount of prints that you make.
What about artists that destroy the negative after a certain number of prints? Like I think one of the Westons was doing that.
Oh yes, Brett Weston, when he died, he just before he died, he burned all his negatives because he didn't want anyone making prints from his negatives. So that wasn't really during his lifetime as much as, after death. We really try to avoid posthumous prints, purchasing them, because then the artist isn't around to authenticate them. He or she isn't around to tell us, what they should look like. And oftentimes artists change their ideas of how their art would look after 20 years. At one point, we had a program for adding a contemporary backup print if we purchased a 1970s or 60s chromogenic print because of the fading. And we thought, okay, we'll give the artist a chance to give us a backup print. But the artist never gave us a print that was similar to the one that we acquired. So we stopped doing that.
Hi, Paul. I'm Edwin. And I'm wondering, I think my question is in two parts. So the first part is, what are your standards in collecting digitally printed photographs? That's number one. And number two is, how important is the quality or the condition of the vintage prints you acquire?
Hmm. Okay. Digital printing has come a long way, and um, you can, you look at it, and if it sings to you, if it looks good to my eye, then I'm going to buy it. If it is murky, muddy, then I'm going to reject it. So really just is all about looking at the physical print. And, whenever possible, I insist on seeing the physical prints before I actually close the purchase completely. That will work up to that, but we won't quite close it until I've seen the actual prints. So I know I have the highest quality. In some cases with vintage prints, you have to consider the rarity of the material and also the kind of ways that the artist, him or herself, would handle the prints. For instance, Ouija, who was a newspaper photographer, was very rough with his prints. He would stack them in his apartment and, have a coffee and put it on top of it was like really kind of messy and dirty. So you find the prints in not in perfect condition, but if you find a really good one, it might be worth taking one that's not in the best, not pristine condition. And you can always have the conservators do a little work on it if the damage is just around the edges. So really, it's case by case, depending on how rare the material is. If we found a daguerreotype by Daguerre, we would take it in almost any condition, just because there's only 30 or so daguerreotypes by Daguerre in the world. So, we would be much more open to something that was in poor condition. But for the new things, we want them to look pristine.
And do you consider inkjet prints, giclée prints to be, reasonably archival? Does the museum, how does you look at
Yes.
that?
The most artists will say they're archival pigment prints, and it's true that there is some pigment in there, which is more stable than dye. But in all these modern printmaking processes, there's some dye. So they will change, but they're relatively stable, and we hold them in special conditions, temperature and humidity controlled vaults that are monitored 24 hours a day by engineers to make sure that the environment is just so. And we also have a policy of not overexposing them. For instance, if we do a show and we want to travel it, we'll only travel it to 2 other venues, not to 5 or 6, like some museums might do. So we're limiting the exposure to light. But I'd rather have an inkjet print than a chromogenic print, to be honest, because I know that it will have a greater longevity. But there are other more vintage processes in color that stand up, like Polaroid, as long as it's kept in the dark and at a stable temperature, it really doesn't change much. Kodachrome, that's terrible. It will change. Your reds will change. Your greens will change. Cibachrome is good. That doesn't change much. Dye transfer is very good, but the best is probably Carbro, which is carbon pigment. That's tough as nails.
Hi. Hello.
Hi.
Paul, I'm Esme. I just wanted to ask, you mentioned something about you don't purchase posthumously printed work. So I was just wondering your personal insight on Vivian Mayer photos, or if there's an exceptions to the rule. I don't know also if you have.
Well, we have made an exception in a couple cases. For instance, we acquired the Maplethorpe archive from Maplethorpe estate with the Los Angeles County Museum of Art. And when Maplethorpe died, he told his executor to fill out his editions. So during his lifetime, if he made 2 prints and the edition was 15, the estate was instructed to be able to go up to 15 and then stop. And what they did is they had Maplethorpe's original printer, somebody who worked with Maplethorpe making the prints, and in some cases it was his own brother. And what they would do is they would keep a match print, and his brother or the other printer would get the match print, and they would try and make the rest of the edition look exactly like the original print that they had on file. So in order to acquire Maplethorpe's, the totality of Maplethorpe's edition work, which is about 2,000 objects, we took some posthumous prints, but we didn't pay for those. Those were donated to us. So we try to avoid paying for posthumous prints. But if we really want them and somebody's willing to donate them, we might accept them. And was there another part to that question? Did I miss something? Oh, Vivian Mayer. That was it.
Yeah, that was more of like an example, because like those prints were printed after she died. So
Yes. Yes.
yeah, if you have a
No, no.
personal insight or comment on
I
that.
have a particular opinion about this, and it's that Vivian Mayer was very talented, and she did a lot of great pictures. But what influence did she have on people during her own day or after? Zero. None. So that changes things in my mind. It's like Edward Weston, he had a big impact on the history of photography and all the artists that came after him. So we need to value him more than we value Vivian Mayer because she had no impact on her contemporaries. She didn't teach any students. She kept it all a secret, even though she was supremely talented. It's kind of a shame. And I wish there were vintage prints, but I think there are very few.
That's it. Thank you.
When I was in graduate school, the photographer that could support himself was by his print sales was, among others, was Ansel Adams, and and people like Imogen Cunningham, she was selling her prints for like $85, I think, to students.
Right. Yes.
In her workshops and things, and I just, how did Adams work fare? I mean, he was selling those huge Moonrise over Hernandez. Are they still considered like valuable?
They're still considered blue chip.
Yeah.
They're still selling like hotcakes.
No kidding.
For high prices.
Are they continuing to reprint?
No. No, these are vintage ones that I'm talking about, vintage prints by Adams. But Adams was a master of printmaking. He wasn't what I would call very visually avant-garde, but he was an amazing printer. And he was an amazing marketer of his own work. And, all these things come into play with the valuation. Sometimes people ask me, oh, how do I get my prices up? and it's a hard question to answer because it has to do with the artist's personality. It has to do with the patronage that that person can get. It has to do with which gallery the person goes with. There's a lot of different factors feeding into this. And sometimes it could be disheartening for artists that are purists to see other artists doing so well on work that isn't very good. I will give you one. Cindy Sherman. It's horrible work. The 1970s work was great, but after that, it just went downhill, and it gets worse and worse. But she makes a lot of money. So she was never challenged to change her tune and try something different. Whereas if she had been struggling and she hadn't made a lot of money on her first try, she might have tried to do something different.
It's me again, Edric. I was wondering how you treat works by photographers, but in a different medium. I remember once I saw non-golded slideshow at the Tate, and is that considered photography to you? And also in connection to that, how do you, is silk screen printed photograph still a photograph? It's just a silly question, but I was wondering what you thought about that.
Yeah, these aren't really 100%. You know, they're not fish nor fowl. They're something a little bit different. It's like the cliche, the glass scratching print that's made photographically, where you put a photographic image on a plate with glass and then you scratch off the pattern and then you make a print. It's, you know, partly photography, but not all the way. And that's what these things are. I think, you know, they have a place and they can be added to exhibitions to round them out and make them interesting. You know, I've been adding works in other media to my exhibitions now for quite some time, in addition to ephemera that I sometimes buy on eBay. I think that it helps round out the show, it makes it more exciting, and shows people how these pictures have traveled outside of, you know, normal photography, you know, into magazines and as posters or as a slideshow in other ways, rather than the kind of traditional ways.
Hello, Paul. It's me again, Angela.
Hi.
Do you have a contemporary female photographer that you like or admire positively?
Oh, yes.
Sally Mann and Diane
Sally
Arbus.
Mann is great.
Oh, finally. Diane Arbus?
Oh, yeah.
There.
Diane Arbus is amazing. I mean, she has this way of taking things that are ordinary and making them look strange. Like, for instance, in my slideshow, I had the picture of Anderson Cooper as a baby. And his mother, Gloria Vanderbilt, asked Arbus to make his picture for Harper's Bazaar. And she got so close to his little head that it looked very strange. And so in the end, Vanderbilt didn't like it and wanted her to destroy the picture, but she didn't. I did the show on Imogen Cunningham, which was, you know, really amazing. I realized that she's so much more important than I thought when I started off. She was the only female in her chemistry courses at the University of Seattle. And the men made fun of her because they thought she wouldn't succeed because she was a woman. She finished in 3 years instead of 4. She left them all behind in the dust. She got an award from her sorority to study in Germany, where she learned to speak German fluently. And while she was there studying photographic chemistry, she invented a new photographic process. She returns to Seattle in 1910, and she starts her own studio. And in 1913, she authors an article about photography as a good profession for women. And later on, when people asked her if she was a feminist, she said, "I'm not a woman, I'm a photographer." And what she was telling people is that she didn't see it as men and women in a career. She just thought it as a career, and she was an individual within a career, and that she could compete with anyone. So she really was an incredible person. And I really enjoyed discovering that and realizing that she was more important than I thought she was when I started. That's the goal of a good exhibition, is that you want people to leave with a greater appreciation for the artist than when they came in. And that often means having a smaller exhibition, knowing how big your exhibition should actually be to hold people's attention, so that when they leave, they think, "Oh my God, this person is amazing. Where do I see more?" Instead of having 500 pictures on view, something that no one could sustain, not even me. I'd be exhausted, and I would think less of the photographer by the time I finished. So that's what I call curatorial responsibility.
I was lucky to take a workshop with Imogen in Yosemite, and she was she was in her 90s, and she had more energy than anyone. Really amazing
Right.
woman.
Paul, I think that wraps it
Yes.
up. This is
Okay.
Lisa. Yeah. Thank you so much. We really appreciate your giving your time to us from LA. It's Saturday evening. You'd probably prefer to be out partying, but you're here with us. So we're really
Well,
grateful.
I wouldn't trade it for anything. I love, talking to people about photography.
Yes. And we learned a lot today, I think. So thank you. I hope you can hold on for a few minutes. We need to take a photograph um, with Neil, just to mark your presence in the Art Fair Talks program. So thank
Oh,
you,
great.
Paul. Yeah, thank you, Paul. Okay, thanks.